In May of this year, Sweden completely ended prescribing hormones, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers to minors.
Hold up, let's get the fact check on that. Yeah, they're still allowing medical transition, but they're doing so in a research setting so that they can collect data on this subject. That's not the same thing as a ban. That's a push for more data. Very dishonest framing. Blaire White is so easy to dunk on because Blaire White is a grifting bad faith actor. Blaire White lied about her political compass test. She fabricated the result of her political compass test to make it appear like she was a right-winger when the answers that she put in provided a center-left response. Let's see Blaire White respond to her cancellation over her own hypocrisy. By the way, she still has a platform. She's in no way canceled. She just likes to use the aesthetic of cancellation because it makes it appear like she's being silenced when here she is making a video that gets 356,000 views. You are not silenced, Blaire. You are not silenced at all. She also called me Dobby the Elf. She said that I'm a trans Dobby the Elf on my Libs of TikTok thread. I never forget. This goes out to the time you called me Dobby the Elf, Blaire. Never forget.
So if you've been watching this channel for any considerable amount of time, 5 seconds even would be enough time to know that I am a trans adult who is against transitioning children.
The specific irony that comes with this is Blaire White has said on Joe Rogan and on other appearances that she knew that she was trans when she was 5 years old. She knew that she was a transgender child.
I've gone through a lot of changes in my life. The same one of them. And to people who support the 100% objectively experimental chemical...
Objectively experimental? You mean for like the medicine's been approved by the FDA for literal decades? The standard medical practice, which is supported by the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, every major medical institution upholding gender-affirming treatment, apparently that's experimental to you? Objectively? Yeah, that's not really what objectively means, so nice try.
Castration of minors, oftentimes before they're even old enough to attain like a driver's permit or a driver's license.
Castration? Before they're able to obtain a driver's license? I have never heard of anyone receiving sterilizing surgery as like a gender-affirming surgery at an age younger than like the legal driving age. Like, you can get a learner's permit at like 14, full licenses typically at like 16, I think, depending on the state. The youngest for anything that could ever be sterilizing was 16 or 17. And these are the cases of somebody who's been in gender therapy their literal entire life, who has had multiple doctor's letters, diagnoses. These are the richest, most privileged kids that have parents that have been at the gender therapist doctor's office since this kid ever expressed any form of transgender identity, and they're able to identify, yeah, these are the people that actually benefit from this. And we're talking about specifically bottom surgeries accounts for less than 10 minors per year over the past 5 years. That's the sheer numbers we're talking about. Less than 10 per year out of the most privileged teenagers who have been in gender therapy their entire life. Like literally your Jazz Jennings kind of case. Less than 10 a year. And this is what's causing Blaire's insane outrage.
Those people, I am basically public enemy number one.
They're calling puberty blockers chemical castration. Well, that's really freaking silly because as soon as you stop the puberty blockers, you are able to become fertile again. So calling it chemical castration just doesn't really make sense.
Take it from Matt Walsh.
What is a woman?
They can take it from Ben Shapiro.
I said certified freak 7 days a week. Wet ass P word. Make that pullout game weak.
And honey, they can take it from Miss Candace Owens.
This bitch so crazy.
This girl is a guy.
Guys.
What is Blaire even trying to do? I don't even understand what the point of that interjection was.
But to hear it from a trans woman, they lose their It's kind of glorious, really.
You know that people are opposed to Matt Walsh being like trans bad? People are opposed to like Candace Owens being like trans bad? Don't you support the free marketplace of ideas? Don't you support freedom of speech? People should be allowed to push back against your shitty ideas. If you want to debate me, Blaire, I would love to debate these topics in the free marketplace of ideas. But, you know, if you just want to grift and pretend that you're being silenced on this video with over 350,000 views, then, well, that's what you're going to keep doing.
This drama, so funny. And it's a year-long drama. This is a drama that has resurged every few months. And I've never addressed it, but I guess today I'm just bored. A year ago, I went on the Joe Rogan podcast. It was an amazing experience. It was an experience that, you know, obviously with the type of career that I have, that is like the creme de la creme. That is the highest point. You have peaked once you have been on Joe Rogan.
Blaire saying she peaked a year ago. Okay.
being overwhelmingly positive. I mean, I would say 99.99999% of Joe Rogan's audience was entirely receptive to having a trans woman such as myself on the show.
That's because you say all the things they want to hear. Joe Rogan's audience tends to be not the best on trans issues, as Joe himself is not the best on trans issues. And so obviously if you say the things they want to hear, then yeah, most of them are going to be like, wow, she's saying the things we want to hear.
Didn't get any hate like at all. I know that sounds crazy, but from Joe Rogan's audience, I genuinely don't remember ever seeing one hate comment since I've been on.
I sincerely doubt that. How do you know that the hate comments you got, none of them were from Joe Rogan's audience? How do you know that? She's just narrativizing here. She doesn't have any evidence that none of the hate comments she ever received were from Joe Rogan's audience. I'm sure there's some people that are pretty transphobic in Joe's audience that probably said some horrible things about her. She's just trying to build a narrative that it's only the crazy woke leftists that are coming to attack her.
Always there to
Based on no evidence, of course.
because it's just such in demand, is trans activists. So all year since going on the Joe Rogan podcast, in waves, I have had trans activists and rabid leftists attacking me for a clip that we are going to watch together.
When did you feel, if you can remember, when did you feel like something was off? That you were supposed to be a girl?
Like 5.
At 5?
Yeah, I remember being in preschool. Like my earliest memories in life were feeling like the only way I can describe it was like a very intense misalignment between the way I was perceived and the way I had my self-concept. So I would say 5, but obviously I didn't have the words to articulate it at 5.
Was that when you first started going? Did you go to preschool?
Mm-hmm.
So was that when you were around other kids? Is that when you
Yes.
started feeling it?
Yeah. First of all, I mean, preschool is kind of like the earliest time people even have memories, but also like that's when you start being socially separated by gender. It's like, you know, I have a very vivid memory of like the boys' cubby area where you put your backpack and your schoolwork, and the girls, and it was like the girls was pink, the boys was blue, and that's superficial, but you start to see the division really early. And I just had this inherent sense that I would never be able to fit into like a maleness ever.
So let's just break down what happened in that clip right there. Blaire is clearly expressing that she had the gender identity of a girl when she was 5 years old. And the way that we commonly define the term transgender is somebody whose gender identity is different than the gender that was assigned to them at birth. So, you know, when she was being raised by her parents, they're like, okay, you're going to be a boy, whatever. Her gender identity was that of a girl. This means that categorically, she was a transgender child. She had this transgender identity as a child. So being opposed to transgender children that have this identity, which is identical to the identity that she had, that would make her a hypocrite.
So the claim is that I am somehow hypocritical for saying that I felt gender dysphoria at 5, which, if you look at the studies, people who genuinely have lifelong persisting gender dysphoria typically start experiencing that at ages as young as 5. That has nothing to do with the child's ability to consent, and on a personal level, that has nothing to do with my ability to consent at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, to transition.
Let's be clear, that was a bit of a goalpost shift right there. The question at hand is whether or not a child can be transgender, can have a transgender identity, but then she goes on to say, well, I don't think they should medically transition. First off, nobody's trying to medically transition a 5-year-old. That just doesn't make sense. There is no reason why anyone would try to perform any kind of medical intervention before the onset of puberty, because there's no kind of like sexually dimorphic mechanisms in play which we could prevent or intervene on until the onset of puberty as part of like a medical transition. So she's moving the goalpost from gender identity being transgender to medical transition, which is something that nobody's advocating for 5-year-olds. So yes, she was a transgender child. She had the gender identity of a girl, but nobody was saying she should medically transition at 5. And this is the goalpost that she's trying to attack because it's easier to attack, and it's not what people are criticizing her for.
Surgeries, chemical castration, drugs, lifelong medicalization, deciding if I want to have children in the future at that young age. Like,
Nobody's advocating for that to happen at age 5. Literally nobody's advocating for that.
please make it make sense. Please make it make sense that me talking about my own experience somehow contradicts the truth that children cannot consent to transition.
Nobody's saying that a 5-year-old can consent to medical transition. So you're just arguing against the straw man, Blaire.
Happy that a trans woman is on the largest podcast on the planet, and just be appreciative of that good old representation that they claim that they want at every turn. I've gotten nothing but hate from the community, which is fine. I'm used to it. Duh.
I think there's definitely something to be said about good representation versus bad representation. I don't think you're a very good representation of the trans community. You don't seem to stand for the beliefs that the trans community have. Like the belief that, yeah, there can be a 5-year-old who can recognize that their gender identity is different than the gender that was assigned to them at birth. That this 5-year-old could benefit from being able to wear their hair as they like, from being able to go by the name they like, by be able to use the pronouns that they like. That's all we're really talking about for someone who's like, you know, below puberty, just being able to wear the clothes they want, go by a name they want, that kind of thing. Really, really simple stuff. Blaire, you are a pick-me. Trans people are going to be upset, you know?
However, they really think they got me. Like, they think it's a huge gotcha. In response to one of my tweets, someone named Ari on Twitter posted the video as a gotcha, and she said, she could be such an important voice for trans acceptance to conservatives, and instead, she just ignores her own actual experience to tell them exactly what they want to hear.
Spot on.
Here's the thing. I am fully aware of my own experience. I'm not ignoring a damn thing. That's why I'm going on the world's largest podcast and telling something very personal, telling a very personal story. I mean, if you can't process that a trans adult who, I don't know, maybe has very intimate, specific knowledge of what a transition entails, could possibly come to this just radical conclusion that that's something best reserved for adults.
Let's be clear. We're not talking about whether or not a 5-year-old can medically transition, because nobody's advocating for that. She's once again arguing against this straw man, against this shifted goalpost.
Rather than minors, I don't know what world you're living in. It's very disturbing, actually.
I really want to see how Blairite would respond to the argument from intersex conditions and gender-affirming medical interventions, which we allow and grant all the time, far more often for intersex teenagers than for trans teenagers. For example, it's actually somewhat common for intersex men to develop boobies during puberty, and it is the current medical practice that these boobies, called gynecomastia, they are allowed to have them removed if they don't want them, around the age 14, 15, 16, about that age. So this is a life-altering, body-altering surgery performed on someone who is under the age of 18. That is a gender-affirming treatment that is altering their natural body, because these intersex men, their bodies naturally develop titties, but if they don't want to have those boobies, then yeah, I think it's fine for them to remove them. If somebody is very much so uncomfortable with a gender dysphoria, and there is medical treatment which can help them, and they have all the screening and doctor's letters and therapist letters and a gender dysphoria diagnosis, which shows that yes, they would actually benefit from this, such as the intersex men with gynecomastia, then yeah, I think there's definitely an argument to be made that we can allow these types of, these medicines or these procedures. Is Blaire going to be opposed to like intersex teenagers with gynecomastia getting their boobies removed? Because like we literally have thousands of cases of this per year. Meanwhile, for like trans people that get gender affirming surgeries, the number is tiny. Intersex people get tons of gender affirming surgeries, even as teenagers. And also intersex people are often prescribed hormones as teenagers. So I really see, you know, trans gender affirming care as very analogous to intersex gender affirming care. And I think that both trans and intersex people should have the right to seek gender affirming treatment for the gender that they desire to be. And we can get doctors and therapists and gender therapy, all the stuff on board to make sure that it's right for them. You know, this has been pretty standard medical practice for intersex people for literal decades. I literally don't think that Blaire White could actually engage with that argument. It's the argument that completely defeats everything that she's trying to say. Even if we grant the most charitable version of her argument, where we're talking about people who are after the age of puberty, like 14, 16, for things like gender-affirming hormones, stuff like that. And by the way, all the medical literature we have on informed consent points to people have the mental capacity such that they can provide informed medical consent for procedures, so long as we have doctors and therapists on board as well, and around the age of 12. It seems that 12 is when we have all those mental capacity developed such that somebody can provide informed medical consent with the help of doctors and therapists. So yeah, somebody who's 12-year-old, they actually absolutely would have the capacity to consent to puberty blockers with the help of doctors and therapists based off of the studies we have on mental capacity. And then when they become 14, 16, if, you know, they continue their gender therapy and cross-sex hormones are right for them, they should also have the right to do that. That's really what we're advocating for. It's pretty simple. And it's consistent with how we treat intersex people right now.
Compromise my beliefs that the innocence of children should be protected, that the body parts of children should be protected. I don't know why you're fighting for the opposite.
Does she think that we should not remove gynecomastia boobies from intersex men? I really need to know how she'd respond to this, because like this is the key argument that really kind of points out, well, where's this boundary that we're comfortable with?
And I'm sure you think I'm a monster for my position, but guess what? The feeling's mutual. If you believe someone can consent to having their penis removed as a teenager, you're a monster. I have no problem saying that. Insert everyone screaming, that never happens, except you guys kind of effed up when you aired an entire reality show about a minor, Jazz Jennings, getting her vaginoplasty.
Once again, we're talking about less than 10 per year. And these are like 17-year-olds who have had gender therapy their entire life. So yeah, I think that 17-year-olds who've had gender therapy their entire life, we can be pretty confident that we found who's actually trans. Like, these are people who have been benefiting from hormones for years, and then, you know, gender therapy their entire life, and then they can get a surgery like a year earlier. It's only the most privileged people who have had all of the gender therapy in the world that ever get this as an option. And once again, less than 10 per year.
Listeners coming out, all of which end up in my email box, so sorry, you can't lie. And as far as telling everyone what they want to hear, I'm pretty sure there's a very well carved out path for trans people to just spout all the exact same lines like a damn hive mind drone and be patted on the head for it, be given shows on CNN for it, be on TV for it.
Wait, she's saying that if you just say the right things, you get to go on CNN and all these organizations? Where's my invite? You're actually saying the things that the audience wants to hear. You are confirming the already existing beliefs of Joe Rogan's audience. And you know that, Blaire. You also know that people aren't told, hey, you support gender transition? Oh my gosh, let's get you on CNN. Yeah, that's really not how it works, or else I would have been on CNN already.
Who doubts that if I just sat up here every day and said children should be able to transition, there are 97 genders, and white people are the root of all evil in the world, that I wouldn't have had 2 shows on CNN by now?
Yeah, that's not what the left believes on either of those topics. So, nice try, Sweaty.
I've never even been on Fox News. What's the telling people what they want to hear, and what exactly is the gain? I have a successful YouTube channel and a successful podcast that I am constantly under threat of being censored or banned from the liberals who run YouTube, so...
She thinks that liberals run YouTube? That's really funny, given that every study we have on algorithmic content, and specifically YouTube's algorithmic content, shows that right-wing content does better in the algorithm than left-wing content. Also, CEOs of major corporations have every incentive to bolster conservatism, because they're the ones, the Republicans are the ones that's going to give them those sweet, sweet billionaire tax breaks that they want. Yeah, no, trying to say that Google is a liberal corporation is completely false.
Am I really telling everyone what they want to hear? I'm certainly not telling YouTube what they want to hear.
No, you're just telling YouTube what they want to hear, and you're telling Joe Rogan's fans exactly what they want to hear.
Certainly not telling you and the mob behind you what they want to hear. Hunter Avalon also posted...
Hey, Hunter Avalon, let's go!
...that I was being hypocritical by this, that how could I possibly, you know, have felt gender dysphoria at 5 and still think that children can't consent to transition, as if those are contradictory thoughts.
Hold up, she swapped what she's referring to again. So the tweet that Blaire White said was, a transgender 4-year-old is like a vegan cat. We all know who's making the lifestyle choices. Transgender, referring to somebody whose gender identity is different than the gender assigned to them at birth. So Hunter is pointing out that by Blaire White admitting to Joe Rogan that she knew she was trans at age 5, Blaire White would have been a transgender 5-year-old, because her gender identity was that of a girl, different than the gender that was assigned to her at birth, the gender of being a boy. So Hunter Avalon is correctly pointing out Blaire's hypocrisy over the existence of transgender 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, because Blaire herself, by the very definition of transgender, was categorically a transgender 5-year-old. And then if you caught what Blaire said...
How could I possibly, you know, have felt gender dysphoria at 5 and still think that children can't consent to transition, as if those are contradictory thoughts?
She went on to say, but children can't consent to transition. That's not what's being argued here. Hunter Avalon's tweet had nothing to do with consent to medical transition. Hunter Avalon's tweet had to deal with what it means to be transgender, and that's one that has a gender identity different than the gender that was assigned them at birth. This was a very sneaky goalpost shift but Blaire White is being very dishonest by shifting that goalpost there from being transgender to medically transitioning. It's exactly what she's doing there.
It's so funny. True story. True story. The last time I saw or heard of Hunter Avalon, who used to be like a right-wing YouTuber and then switched up, the last time I saw or heard of him.
We're gonna get some tea on Hunter. Let's go. Yeah, for those that don't know, Hunter Avalon was a former right-winger, produced content primarily on YouTube. Nowadays, he is a leftist. He streams on YouTube and Twitch, does debates and stuff like that. Very cool guy. Definitely recommend him. Check out his stuff. He's super cool.
Was in a hotel at a convention that we both had done. It was a bunch of YouTubers hanging out in a hotel room. He started calling an ex-YouTuber named Theron Meyer a man to her face, would not say sorry, made Theron cry, and then he started crying because everyone took Theron's side who was crying over him being a dick. So I say that to say, like, these people are walking, talking projections.
Blaire White's argument against Hunter Avalon is that years ago, back when Hunter was a conservative, Hunter was transphobic? We already knew that. Everybody knew that Hunter used to be a right-winger and Hunter used to be transphobic. In spite of people applying social pressure for him to apologize, shows that he was being very genuine in his beliefs back then, which, you know, as somebody who has now changed his beliefs, would give good credence to the idea that he is now being genuine in his new beliefs, his pro-trans beliefs, his belief that, yes, Blaire White is being contradictory because she herself was transgender at age 5 because her gender identity was different than the gender assigned to her at birth when she was 5 years old. So yeah, Hunter Avalon is correct. Blaire White's attack on Hunter is just that Hunter used to be transphobic. Yes, we already knew that.
Behind every, like, social justice warrior, libbed out, woke, like, is a history of probably the exact behavior that they are trying to come for someone else for doing.
Yes, that shows that they've grown as a person. What you're showing is that Hunter had a problematic past. Yeah, he used to be a transphobe, but he later changed his mind, realized that he was wrong for being transphobic, and I'm sure that if this happened today, he would apologize to that trans woman because he is genuine in his belief that trans people are cool. By the way, also Blaire trying to say that somebody's opinion or belief is invalid because they've been, like, transphobic to someone. Do we want to dig up Blaire White's history with Riley Dennis? Yeah, Blaire White would misgender this trans activist YouTuber, Riley Dennis, because Blaire disagreed with her. Blaire would misgender and say that they're a trans trender and not a real trans person. And Blaire White literally committed transphobia against this other trans person. Like, if this is the argument that defeats somebody's existence or their ideas, then you've defeated yourself, because Blaire, you have a history of being transphobic to other trans people. Hunter, being somebody who used to be transphobic, who changes beliefs, is actually somebody who's doing better than you, who are still weaponizing transphobic talking points against trans people, especially trans youth, who you yourself were a trans youth.
People
The
can say
walking
I'm transphobic
hypocrisy is
all day, every
insane.
day. I've never looked at a trans woman in the face and be like, you're a man, you're a he.
You definitely misgendered Riley directly, so much so that you had to make an apology video where you broke down crying. Yeah, Blaire, you're lying about yourself. You have a history of this.
And, like, regardless of how you feel about trans issues, like, it's really nuts to just be that rude for no reason.
Blaire, you are criticizing yourself here.
Nice person. So glad Hunter's now taken up the mantle for trans people and coming for me, but anyways.
She's not even addressing Hunter's point. Her only argument against Hunter is you used to be a transphobe. Yeah, so did you, Blaire. Okay?
Trying to point out some sort of hypocrisy here by me telling my own story and still holding the beliefs I have is that in the exact same episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, I talked about being against children transitioning, and I actually had pushback from Joe. I was further, like, in the anti-children transitioning category than Joe Rogan himself. So for people to act as if they have the moral high ground when advocating
Show the clip.
for what will undoubtedly, in probably just a few years here, be considered the lobotomies of the 21st century.
Undoubtedly, she believes that the current medical standard put forth by the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Endocrine Society, every major medical institution, she thinks that in a couple of years it's going to be viewed the same as lobotomy. That's crazy. Every study we have on this topic shows that the mental health and overall well-being of trans youth that are able to access gender-affirming treatment, those that have gone through the screening of gender therapy, profoundly benefit from this treatment. Has she been lobotomized or something? Has she herself been lobotomized? Like, I think you have to be that brain dead to make this comparison.
You really don't have a moral high ground, and unfortunately, you're losing on this issue.
Blaire is saying that my opponents do not have the moral high ground because they're advocating for what I'm calling lobotomy. Well, when you frame it like that, it sure sounds like you have the moral high ground. But in reality, we're advocating for something that every major medical institution, their established guidelines, show improves the mental health of people, which is not what is true about lobotomy. Lobotomy is shown to hurt people. Gender transition is shown to help trans people. So, brain dead, lobotomized take from Blaire White right here.
Because many of the countries that at one time these activists looked back and said, we're pointing to Sweden, we're pointing to Australia, we're pointing to the UK, and look, they're so progressive and they're letting kids transition. All those countries are reversing their guidelines. In fact, every country I just named is reversing their policy on kids transitioning.
Yeah, that's not true. There have been pushes in lots of these countries to provide greater access to gender therapy, to provide, greater screening, to figure out who is actually going to benefit from gender-affirming treatment. But none of these countries that she's mentioned have banned gender-affirming treatment. It's just been pushes for more gender therapy, pushes for enrolling people into studies so we can get more long-term data. Not the same thing as like reversing or banning medical treatment, which is kind of the framing she's using. This is a very dishonest framing.
In May of this year, Sweden completely ended prescribing hormones, cross-sex hormones, and puberty blockers to minors.
Hold up, let's get the fact check on that. They're still allowing medical transition, but they're doing so in a research setting so that they can collect data on this subject. That's not the same thing as a ban. That's a push for more data. Very dishonest framing.
Australia is currently in the process of reversing their guidelines based on puberty blockers, stating that they are not indeed reversible and that there needs to be psychological care given to these children before being placed on medications that alter their body permanently.
I am positive that Blaire White is lying similarly to how she lied about Sweden. This is obviously going to be another case where they're trying to push for more gender therapy and then to administer these medications in a research setting so they can collect more data on this medicine and this type of treatment. That is not the same thing as a ban. Blaire White is lying to you. As we just demonstrated, she lied about Sweden.
I always state that in California, it's illegal to use a tanning bed under the age of 18, but you can get a double mastectomy, you can go on cross-sex hormones that sterilize you for life, and you can go on puberty blockers. Make it make sense.
This framing makes it sound like you can just walk up to any doctor and be like, hello, I would like 1 testosterone and 2 double mastectomy, please, and then you get it right away. That's not how it works at all. There is lots of gender therapy and doctor's letters and therapist letters that goes into this. So, trying to frame it as like a walk-in tanning bed salon is a very disingenuous framing because gender-affirming treatment is not a walk-in, walk-out process for minors, not at all.
Tavistock, which is a gender clinic in the UK which specialized in treating kids, minors, is completely shutting down after a report revealed that it is not safe or viable to transition children.
Was that the gender identity clinic that got attacked and got threats and stuff? Was that the one that she's referring to? Because I know there was a clinic that got shut down because crazy transphobes were threatening bomb threats and stuff. So I do not trust Blaire White at all after she blatantly lied about Sweden. Her framing is so dishonest. And she is telling outright lies about what's going on in these different clinics and countries. Also, chat brings up a really good point that the way in which Blaire White is framing this, her narrative is that, oh, a minor can just walk up to a clinic and get top surgery. That's not even how it works for adults. Yeah, even adults have to go through rigorous screening processes and receive multiple doctors and therapist letters for gender-affirming surgery. Even as adults have to go through wait lists, have to go through doctor's letters, therapist letters, gender dysphoria diagnoses to get these surgeries. It is not a walk-in, walk-out process, even for adults.
I would even say that just because I had gender dysphoria at 5 did not mean I was a trans kid at 5.
What's the definition of transgender then, Blaire? Is your definition of transgender somebody who medically transitions? Because that would be like transsexual. I don't think there's any transsexual 5-year-olds, but transgender... I mean, we can even just look up the common definition of transgender. Denotes or relating to a person whose gender identity does not correspond with the sex registered for them at birth. So Blaire White, whose gender identity was that of a girl, differing from the sex registered for her at birth, being male, would meet even the common definition of transgender from Oxford Languages. I don't know what definition of transgender she's using. I would love to see her explain what her definition is and why a 5-year-old cannot be it. But even the common definition of transgender does include Blaire White as a 5-year-old.
I had no concept of what trans was. I was experiencing a very real medical condition, which is gender dysphoria. But the fact remains that there's so many different ways that gender dysphoria can go for a kid. It can completely dissolve. It can even mitigate mostly to the point where someone could live a decent life without needing to transition.
Gender dysphoria doesn't inherently make someone trans. There are many types of gender dysphoria that cis people experience. The kinds of gender dysphoria that motivate people to get hair transplants, boob jobs, facial surgeries. Those are absolutely forms of gender-affirming treatment, even for cis people. But the way that we define transgender is based on somebody's gender identity being different than the gender that they were assigned at birth. So I don't know what other definition of transgender you would use. Transgender specifically refers to a gender identity, which is different than the gender assigned at birth. So yeah, like unless she can put forth a coherent definition of transgender, which excludes 5-year-olds with a gender identity different than the one that was assigned to them at birth, then her argument holds no water.
Gender dysphoria could have dissolved for me in all likelihood once I became a teenager or once I became a young adult. It didn't. And that still doesn't change the fact that I was not able to consent as a kid to anything that would have been permanent or life-altering.
The conversation here is not about at what age should people be allowed to consent to X form of medical treatment. There's an interesting conversation to be had there, but obviously Blaire's not even interested in having the conversation with engaging with the edge cases of, different intersex conditions and different things which your body can naturally grow, which they might want to remove for gender-affirming reasons. She's not even willing to have that conversation. But specifically, the criticism that she's receiving is based off of being transgender, having a gender identity, which is different than the gender assigned to them at birth, which she herself did. She's once again doing that goalpost shift from gender identity to medical transition.
Even in my early 20s, when I started my transition, I was not in a headspace to actually make the decision if I wanted to have kids or not. And once I was deep enough in my transition, and I've talked about this on my channel before, once I actually met someone I started thinking about having kids with, it came later in life, much later than me starting my transition. And at that point, I was like, well, now I've been on hormones for years.
A couple things. First off, for people that are not 100% certain that they never want biological kids, they encourage you to look into freezing your swimmers. That's what's encouraged by the doctors that prescribe gender-affirming treatment. They're like, if biological kids are something you're looking for in the future, absolutely look into freezing your little guys. And then the other thing, she said that she met someone that she wanted to have biological kids with. She dates men. How are you going to have biological kids with your boyfriend? How would freezing sperm have done anything to have biological kids with your boyfriend? I see chat is talking about gametogenesis. We're not quite there yet in humans, where we can swap out human gametes interchangeably, but it is an active field of research, and it would also be the kind of thing that once we perfected gametogenesis, you wouldn't need to be somebody who froze sperm in order to produce a viable zygote from gametogenesis. It would be the kind of thing where we could harvest some random cells and then make gametes out of those. I believe we've had success in doing this in rats, and it's actively being researched in humans. And once that becomes a medical scientific success, then there won't even really be a need to freeze sperm, because you could just do an in vitro fertilization.
12-year-olds are, and I'm not saying this to be offensive, obviously 12-year-olds are stupid. They can't make this, try meeting a kid and then tell me they can do that. Actually, maybe some of y'all need to stay away from kids, since you have this obsession with removing their limbs.
All of the medical literature we have on informed medical consent shows that with the aid of doctors and therapists and psychiatrists, that about the age of 12 is when somebody would have all of the mental capacities needed to provide informed medical consent. There's definitely an interesting conversation to be had, obviously a conversation which Blaire White is not going to have, about, what happens when there is a 12-year-old or somebody around that age who wants to consent to medical treatment, but their parents don't. For example, there have been issues where Amish kids get cancer and their parents are like, no, you can't do modern medicine. That's against our beliefs. That's against our way of life. Yet this 12-year-old would have the mental capacity to talk to a doctor and realize, hey, if you don't, get chemotherapy or get this cancer treatment, you're gonna die. And there's absolutely a form of informed consent which the child can obtain, at around the age of 12 with the help of doctors and therapists. That I don't think that we should allow children to die of cancer because their Amish parents don't want them to receive cancer treatment. Definitely an interesting conversation to have. Yeah, also like Christian Science, pray the cancer away style communities. I don't think that children should have to die because their parents don't want them to receive medical treatment, when these are people that every study we have on mental development and mental capacity shows that, yes, informed consent can be obtained with the help of doctors and therapists around the age of 12.
Bit of a red flag when people have to keep explaining consent to you. Like, if you're one of these people that is always in these battles and people are just screaming at you about consent, it might be you, babe. You might be the problem. Like, normal, well-adjusted people with like a healthy grip on reality don't need to constantly be yelled at about consent.
Blaire is actually the one who's blurring the lines of consent here. It's important to recognize that the age of medical consent versus the age of consent for sexual relations versus like the age of consent for alcohol or other substances, there are lots of different ages where we believe that people have mental capacity such that they can provide informed consent for different activities, different procedures, all this stuff. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuance to consent, and this conversation is specifically about medical consent, which the medical standard seems to show that with the help of doctors and therapists is about the age of 12.
It's about the very blatant, obvious reality that it's not really actually transgender people anymore getting surgeries. It's every 13-year-old on TikTok who's convinced that them liking a certain movie or them having a certain personality trait means that they have gender dysphoria.
Wait, she's trying to say that the trans surgeries that minors are receiving are 13-year-olds whom TikTok turned trans? That's kind of crazy, because I have never once seen any case of a 13-year-old receiving a transgender-affirming surgery. And once again, if we're talking about gender-affirming surgeries for trans people at like the age of 17, we're talking about less than 10 per year.
They want to have these kids consent to surgeries and hormones while even removing the idea that gender dysphoria is a precursor to wanting those things. They don't want gender dysphoria to even be a prerequisite to being trans anymore, and so they don't even realize it, but they remove their own arguments.
Hold up, Blaire. If somebody doesn't have gender dysphoria, then they're probably not going to seek, like, a gender-affirming surgery. So it's possible for someone to be transgender, to have a gender identity different than the gender assigned to them at birth. It's possible for them to socially transition. Typically, people that don't have gender dysphoria aren't seeking any kind of medical treatment, and every medical guideline we have right now requires a gender dysphoria diagnosis for minors to receive any form of gender-affirming treatment. So the current advocacy is that for gender-affirming treatment, yeah, it seems that like gender dysphoria would be the motivator for this kind of treatment, especially for minors. But there can be trans people whose gender identity is different than the gender assigned at birth, and or people who want to socially transition that don't have gender dysphoria. That's okay too.
People are catching up to it. You know, the United States is, for whatever reason, just going hard AF, despite all these other European countries rolling back those guidelines and being like, this is actually going to be a really huge scandal when these kids become of age, and we want to just make sure we're not, getting ourselves involved in any crazy lawsuits, which are coming up, by the way.
Please point to the lawsuits, and specifically any lawsuits that have merit for like trans affirming treatment being dangerous or harmful, because I haven't heard of a single one that had merit for that purpose. She might bring up like the Lupron lawsuit, but if she does, the Lupron lawsuit was because Lupron, the maker of the commonly prescribed puberty blocker, was a big pharma market manipulating profit scheme. Like they were sued for manipulating the market of pharmaceuticals. They weren't sued for anything related to the safety or efficacy of their medicine. There's a big difference between the medical research done by public universities and hospitals, which shows the effectiveness of certain medications, the types of people who can benefit from certain types of treatment. That's a very good institution. Meanwhile, the pharmaceutical companies which actually produce these medicines, they're corrupt and evil, and I would absolutely nationalize them and make healthcare public, single payer, which, by the way, cheaper in the long run. Single payer healthcare where everybody gets free healthcare is actually cheaper than the system we have now, because you're cutting out the middleman of these insurance companies. You're cutting out all of the market manipulation, price gouging, advertising, all the stuff for medicines we have, it's kind of messed up that here in the United States, if you watch like cable TV, you're going to get advertisements for prescription medication. That's messed up. Like, why should a TV ad try to convince you that you need a specific prescription medication? That should be a convo between you and your doctor, not the TV trying to say, oh, hey, look, you're going to benefit from our prescription medication. Talk to your doctor to get prescribed our medication. That's not a really good world to live in. That doesn't make medicine better. Trying to sell people into certain medicine. And this is a problem with the pharmaceutical industry. It is not a problem with the efficacy or the academic and hospital-based research into the types of treatment that people benefit from. So definitely we need to criticize Big Pharma, but these criticisms of Big Pharma are not the same thing as criticisms of the medication, criticisms of the medical guidelines which we have. So definitely want to clear up the difference between those two.
That's why entire friend groups transition. Why the would a friend group transition?
Because they're trans. Trans people tend to find other trans people. You ever seen JoJo's Bizarre Adventures? And there for some reason, stand users are just always attracted to other stand users. They somehow naturally find each other. The same things tends to be true with trans people to an extent, due to similarities in experiences, in the types of people they are, the types of things they enjoy. So yeah, that's probably why you see like whole friend groups where it's like, oh my gosh, we're all trans, because they had those commonalities in place, and that's why they were able to become friends so easily.
Why am I once a month seeing a viral TikTok about a friend group transitioning? How is that a thing?
Because they're trans, and their similarities in trans experience allowed them to become friends. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, this affliction of gender dysphoria that supposedly affects 0.00001% of the population just so happens.
I'm sorry? 0.00001% of the population? I think she's using data from like the 70s, when gender dysphoria was extremely underdiagnosed. Okay, go off with your 70s data. Apparently we can trust the data from the 70s, but we can't trust the FDA's approval of puberty blockers, which was done decades ago as well. So, curious.
Meanwhile, the FDA just updated warnings on Lupron, which is the puberty blocker and the actual drug given to pedophiles and people undergoing cancer.
We are doing a ton of narrativizing and trying to deceive. So, medicine can have lots of different applications. Lupron can be used to treat precocious puberty in children that get puberty too early. It can be used to delay puberty in trans kids to give them more time to figure out if a medical transition is helpful for them. Lupron has also been applied to treat things such as testicular cancer or prostate cancer, because having high levels of testosterone can exacerbate and worsen the conditions of that cancer. So Lupron can be used temporarily to slow the development of that cancer, to undergo cancer treatment. And then Lupron has also been used for people that have committed heinous sex crimes, so that it completely neuters their hormone levels and they don't have that kind of like biological drive, that libido. So medicine can have lots of uses. Does not mean that we're trying to put a transgender 12-year-old on Lupron for the rest of their life. It's just to pause their puberty for a year or two, much similar to how we give kids with precocious puberty Lupron for a couple years, and it does not have like long-term impacts on their sexual function. There has not been any statistically significant connection or correlation there.
Brain swelling.
Let's go ahead and talk about this brain swelling condition. FDA warning labels are overly cautious. Whenever there is any kind of like something that has happened in any group of people that take a medication, they just add a warning label. It's like the may cause this. If you look at the extended drug label for literally any medication, it's going to be like may cause X, Y, Z, all this stuff. Once again, if you've seen the pharmaceutical ads which play in the US, they always have that guy talk really fast at the end where they're like, this medication may cause all this stuff. That doesn't mean that the medication has any kind of like link to causing that stuff. It just says that when people were on this medicine, these things have happened. There were 6 cases. All of them were assigned female at birth who were taking puberty blockers and suffered brain swelling and vision loss. Only one of them was trans. 5 out of 6 had precocious puberty, a condition which is already linked to brain swelling and vision loss in the past in and of itself. So it's really hard to point to any kind of direct causation. We have 6 cases more than half resolved, and we're trying to fearmonger about all trans people from this abysmal evidence. So this just has to do with how the FDA errs on the side of caution with respect to medicine may cause XYZ, da 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 da. So yeah, we are fearmongering over something that is resolved in basically every case we saw.
So, with all these countries reversing the guidelines allowing children to transition, with all these tens of thousands of detransitioners coming out,
Tens of thousands of detransitioners coming out? Do we have like any kind of numbers on that? We have to be extremely generous with our math to even try to validate that number. Upper estimate of 33,200. I don't think the math works out if we recognize that not all trans people medically transition. It's definitely an incredibly difficult statistic to validate. But yeah, just doing some napkin math, it would have to be the case that every single person who identifies as trans has medically transitioned, and then we have that 1% of 1% that detransitions for us to reach that kind of like tens of thousands of number, which Blaire is confidently spouting out. I just don't think that Blaire is fair to confidently throw out that statistic when even the napkin math bears out that that's probably not the case.
their idea of the right side of history involves children losing their penises. I don't know. Make it make sense. You can't. Don't even try.
That's it. Our argument is that the left has come to take your penis. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe the medical guidelines show that there are actually trans people out there that benefit from losing their penis. Come take my penis. Try me. Once again, less than 10 procedures per year is what we're talking about as far as like 17-year-olds who ever get like bottom surgery. These people that have been in gender therapy their entire life. Less than 10 per year. And that is the outrage of the left who has come to take your penis. The outrage Blaire is talking about ranges from less than 10 surgeries performed per year to one trans kid on puberty blockers whose symptoms like went away when they received medical treatment for their brain swelling. We're fear-mongering over one person that had brain swelling who was trans, and then like less than 10 trans 17-year-olds that have gotten bottom surgery in a year. That's what Blaire's fear-mongering is about. Like 11 people. Okay. I mean, rather than worrying about 11 people, 82% of trans individuals have considered, 40% have attempted it. 40% to 82% of all trans people seems like a much bigger issue that we can deal with than 11 people who are most likely happy with the treatment that they're receiving, you know? If we can do things like medical transition, like social transition, allowing people to, you know, live in a gender role, use the name they want to go by, use the pronouns they want to go by at school, something that's going to improve their mental health. We know that when children are affirmed in their gender identity, their risk of unaliving themselves drops to less than 1/16 what it is for the general trans population. It is essentially only the trans people that are not affirmed in their identity, that are not able to access the treatment that they need. Those are the trans people that have this incredibly high risk of harming themselves, of unaliving themselves. Meanwhile, the kids that are affirmed in their identity, they turn out just fine. Here was a study that showed 73% reduction in the unaliving rates of trans people that were able to get gender-affirming treatment, gender-affirming hormones, as teenagers. That's awesome. Here's one showing access to gender-affirming hormones in adolescence corresponds with a 40 to 50% reduction and this is even greater than those who were only able to access gender-affirming hormones as adults. So yeah, we can further decrease their by 10 to 20% by allowing them to access gender-affirming treatment as adolescents if this is something that would benefit them. Children who socially transition report levels of depression and anxiety which closely matches that of cisgender children. Wow. Here's another study. Transgender youth often have mental health problems. Depression and anxiety improve greatly with recognition and treatment of gender dysphoria. Crazy, crazy stuff. I think that, you know, things like a 73% reduction in the unaliving rates of trans people is a much better thing, a much more impactful thing to focus on than 10 trans 17-year-olds a year that get surgery and are happy with the results. A much better thing to worry about than one trans kid who had brain swelling on puberty blockers who was able to get treatment for that brain swelling. Yeah, just seems like we're really shifting our priorities to a handful of people that aren't even upset with the results they're getting. Meanwhile, there's much bigger problems going on. So, Blaire White has been destroyed with facts and logic. Thank you so much for watching my content. I really appreciate the support, the engagement, anything you can do to help the channel. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell icon. All of it helps the channel way more than you realize. So thank you so much.